This is a Russian prison. That is a Demogorgon. It's a pretty bad situation to be in. In this video, I'm going to recreate the Demogorgon prison fight from Stranger Things. And to make it more interesting, I'm going to challenge myself to make all of the assets from scratch. First off, we need to create the Demogorgon and the prisoners. I started by creating this really cursed stick figure guy and measured the proportions so the body was roughly 8 heads tall. Then I went to work slowly sculpting this to look more human. As the sculpt went on, we started heading straight into Uncanny Valley territory, where it's kind of hard to tell what exactly is wrong with this face, but something is definitely wrong. Really wrong. Now, I could spend some time to study some anatomy lessons and get this face right, but that would require real effort, so instead I decided to ignore it and move on to turning this guy into a Demogorgon. So I deleted the entire head mesh, blocked out this simple Demogorgon head and joined it together into one object. Then, instead of manually sculpting the Demogorgon proportions, I decided to throw it into Mixamo for some quick rigging and basically just scale the limbs and pose it like this. Then I gathered some reference images, threw those up on a second monitor and went to work sculpting the details of the Demogorgon. At this point, the shape of the Demogorgon was looking great, but it lacked that fine skin detail that you expect in high-budget monster effects. So I decided to create a set of different skin brushes and use those to basically paint on a bunch of really small skin detail like this. And while I was playing around with this, I accidentally set the step count too high and created these really cool ridges on the muscles like this. And I'm gonna be as arrogant as to say I think this actually improves on the original design just a little bit, because it reminds me a bit of the Alien Xenomorph with these spine-like shapes. Once the details were looking awesome, I went on to create this skin texture by brushing different color variations onto different areas. I made the inside of the flaps here and the parts closer to the body a little bit more red to give it a fleshy look, and highlighted the parts sticking out with a lighter blue tint. Finally, you guessed it, I cranked the glossiness up to max and enabled subsurface scattering. And this is our final Demogorgon. Almost. Remember how I skipped some steps with the human face sculpt? Now it was time to go in and try to fix this to a decent level. It was really hard to get a good result because of this messed up geometry around the eyebrow area, but I did my best and ended up with this character right here. And I think this could work since there won't be much focus on the faces in the fight scene, but yeah, this isn't the best sculpt ever. To make the padded prison jackets, I duplicated the torso part of the character, simulated it as a cloth object to get the basic shape, and then subdivided and sculpted it to look more realistic. I used a variety of brushes to get this effect, but this cloth brush really helps to get that realistic wrinkling of the fabric. Once the detail of the jacket was looking good, I baked it to a normal map on the low poly version, so it would be optimized enough to use cloth simulation later. I repeated this method for the pants, made this quick pair of boots, and then got to work on one of the biggest parts of this scene, the prison environment. I started by blocking out the scene with these low poly walls and then used booleans to cut out some parts where the brick would be visible underneath the damage. I added in some fencing and some metal beams, and then to get these piles of snow, I just added in a plane and sculpted it to pop through the ground plane like this. To blend the transition between the floor and the snow, I texture painted this gradient texture to sort of blend the snow texture a little bit better. And I really think a simple trick like this goes a long way to make the snow look a little bit more realistic. To make the snow on the parts that stick out on the walls, I selected all of the upwards facing planes, duplicated them and extruded them like this. At this point the scene was looking pretty good, but we still lack that really cinematic blue and orange lighting that makes it feel really dramatic. So instead of just using fake lights like this, I decided to model the actual light sources from the scene and then give it this emissive material. This way we get a sort of practical light but in 3D. To top it all off, I added this particle emitter with a turbulence force field to emit some snow and set it to render as this snowflake PNG. And this was the final prison environment. Now that we have our characters and our environment, the sort of building blocks of the scene, it's time to move on to the most important step to bring it all to life, the animation. Luckily, I won't have to keyframe the animation entirely by hand since I have this motion capture suit from Rococo. So I can just connect this to the computer, record all of the actions that I need, apply that to my characters, and we have some movement. But unfortunately, the job isn't done here. In games and movies, the raw motion capture data is almost never used as it is. Artists still need to go in and fix potential issues like flickering or sliding foot placement. Luckily, my motion capture data was quite clean already, but I can't physically do some of these moves that we see the Demogorgon do. So I need to use some adjustment layers to exaggerate and enhance the captured motion. And this requires a lot of manual work, but after a few hours of tweaking the poses and timing, this is the final Demogorgon animation that I ended up with. To sell the power of the Demogorgon's punches and also have him be able to throw around people like this, I need to animate some ragdoll physics for the prisoners. I tried a bunch of different methods to create a rig that could switch from animated to physics-based mid-animation, and this is doable in Blender, but it requires some really complex setups. So instead I went with this super simple solution that I thought was quite clever. I created this basic ragdoll setup with some cubes, then manually placed it at the point of impact and simulated the movement separate from the character but placed in the same starting position. Then I keyframed the characters for every 10 frames or so to roughly follow this simulation. This way we get a lot of control of the movement, but it still feels like it was a full-on physics simulation. Plus the blending from the ragdoll to motion capture animation worked great. So we could have him be picked up like this, ragdolled against the wall, and thrown onto the floor, and then it would blend to my motion captured sort of turning around animation. At this point, the scene was looking pretty much finished, but I spent some extra hours to add in the finishing touches, such as the cloth simulation on the jacket, the animation of the Demogorgon mouth, and some blood effects using a combination of a fluid simulation and some flat decals. After many hours of work, I'm proud to present my version of the Demogorgon prison fight. Thank you so much for watching this whole video. I know it was a long one, but I hope you were able to gather some tips for your own scenes along the way. If you want to support these projects and get a bunch of additional content and tutorials, feel free to check out my Patreon, link is in the description. Also, feel free to suggest other scenes that you'd like to see me recreate. And a big thanks to Vincent FX for recommending this one. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.